Back on Morning Kick Around, we're going to talk about the situation at Loudoun United, a USL Championship side out in the exurbs of Washington, D.C., with Pablo Maurer, who wrote a feature. Expose seems very strong a word, Pablo. Is it fair to call it an expose?
Maybe like a expose light or something like that. Mini expose. I'm not sure if there's a word for that. It's probably a word in German for a mini expose.
There probably is. Yeah. The basics of this is that Loudoun United seems not to have the basic things that a soccer club at that level should have. And I think it's fascinating that your story comes out and we're learning about these things while the USL Championship is sort of USL in general, riding a wave of interest and excitement because of their announcement about a first division planned and obviously promotion and relegation. So give us some particulars here. What you learned about Loudoun United.
Yeah, first, I guess a little bit of background on the team, right? They were started, I want to say, in 2019 as the sort of feeder team for DC United. Very much, part of the deal to get a training facility built in Loudoun United, or in Loudoun County, I should say, which, as you said, is maybe 30, 40 miles from DC. They, from the beginning, it was a very strange fit, and from the beginning, they played in this sort of, modular, bare bones stadium, a glorified high school football stadium, basically. And from the beginning, they were also terrible. They have never made the playoffs in their existence. And by this year, let's back up a little bit, actually. In 2023, DC United sold like a controlling interest in the team to Greg Baroni, sort of a local business person who owns 4 minor league baseball teams, and kind of divested from the club, at least partially. And especially since then, conditions of the club have gotten pretty bad. In the piece, some of the things off the top of my head, they're the ones that are like not funny, but they jump at you because they're sort of like the things you'd center a headline around. Like, for example, they have 1 functional shower out of 6, right? There are things that are borderline unsafe, like the turf at Segra Field is coming up, sort of like coming apart at the seams. And then there are things that are just sort of completely insane, like the players don't wear GPS vests. Coaches don't have access to GPS data. That's something that exists like at a lot of high school teams. So it is. It's like it is absurd. To your point, Jason, one of the reasons I did write the piece, aside from the fact that it's just interesting and needed to be talked about, is that like there's all this narrative surrounding USL, rapid expansion, pro rel. You do hear a lot about this sort of Ford Madison, Sacramento Republics of the league that draw 8, 9, 10,000, Louisville City, but towards the other end of the spectrum, there are a mess of teams that just are like, essentially feel like USISL teams in the early to mid 90s. So.
Yeah, that dichotomy is certainly part of the story. Obviously, part of the dichotomy as well is the fact that they have started so well this season. They're on 18 points from 7 games. They're in first place overall, the combined league table, and we're talking about a sizable league with 24 teams, I think, in the USL Championship at this point. So I guess that part of it, sort of that human element, the players sort of. Yeah, I think you have a quote in there, like the common enemy is the owner, right? This feels very much, and I think you referenced it, like Major League, the movie in which the team rallies because the owner is so terrible. That part I can get on board with, but obviously there is the issue. Now USL is going to have to deal with this. I'm curious about the reaction that you might have gotten, whether from USL people, maybe behind the scenes, or just in general from the soccer community about this story.
So, a couple things. I got no reaction from USL. That doesn't mean that they're not dealing with it internally, I guess.
Right.
Sure. I also think there's sort of a baked-in sort of thing for them in that, like, they did just go through this ownership change at the club. The Virginia Revolution, this youth club out in Loudoun County, just became, part investor in the club. So, I'm sure at the league level, they can be like, all right, well, this is sorted out. We'll see how the new owners do. As far as it just like it kind of boggles the mind, man, because it's like, look, you live in this area too, and like we're familiar with our local MLS team, and they have a reputation for thrift and irrelevance, and that's the one thing I'd say about Loudoun. You ask like how people responded to it. Sure, man. There's a couple dozen people on Twitter that are Loudoun fans that said, "Oh man, thank God this is sort of out there." But like, largely this sort of thing is invisible. I always say that like DC United, the club, over the years has sometimes weaponized its irrelevance. I feel like it knows that it's irrelevant. It knows that the franchise value will continue to climb because of just the state of MLS generally. And when tough moments hit, when they have bad seasons, when there's some sort of scandal in the front office, or I think about a piece that comes to mind is the one I wrote about the club using front office staffers as security guards during COVID. When something like that happens, I feel, and this is just my personal opinion, that sometimes the attitude at the club is just, well, whatever, it's a big deal today, but nobody gives a shit. So the story will be over in 2 days, and that's
That
very true.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, certainly, DC United is part of this story, and that makes sense. I mean, I'm sitting here like, oh, we could you can really get angry and sort of shake your fist at the club, but whenever that's happened in the past, so very little has actually come out of it. And that while Loudoun United probably has a very small fraction of the fan base of DC United still acts like it ultimately does not matter. I guess that is interesting because maybe part of the story here is like the birth of Loudoun United, and it's sort of you know uh, not a stillbirth, but obviously a birth of with questionable beginnings to start. And if that's sort of the way that American soccer clubs are going to come into existence in some ways, is there I guess is there an answer here? Because I don't want the club to die. I mean, I don't like that idea of Loudoun United shutting down, but if it's so poorly run, you look at the ownership, you go, okay, if you're not going to invest in it, then why should there be a club there in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it was always to me kind of a head scratcher. I think even DC United knows that. I mean, they've been for several years trying to start up a MLS Next pro team in Baltimore now, which to me seems like a much more viable market than Loudoun County. But it's not to say that this new club, Virginia Revolution, the new owner group, new investors, I should say, that are coming in, that they can't make something of it. I mean, look, my personal opinion, Jason, when they started the team, initially when the branding came out, I actually had a conversation, I think, with somebody at DC United where I said, hey, you're starting this team. Here's what you should do. Like, look at the other teams in USL are doing well. Like I said, Ford, Madison, whatever. They have an interesting brand identity. They hired smart people like to do community engagement and to do the branding, that sort of stuff. They have very much sort of like a minor league baseball, real unique vibe. And when I
Yeah.
saw that the club was going to be, Loudoun United, black and red, playing in this just essentially like a green field between the prison and the airport, I just like thought there's no way this is going to work. I think if somebody came in, fixed that stadium, which they intend to do apparently, and made the team something unique, maybe it would work. I mean, the other thing, it's funny, dude. The other thing that strikes me about all this is, the new owners who I talked to, by all accounts, seem well intentioned, and I should say that like I've talked to a couple of Loudoun United players in the past week or two that say, okay, like already conditions are starting to improve, which is good.
Yeah.
But this is just a very much like American soccer thing. I mean, like I for example, just the other day Googled the owner of Virginia Revolution, this guy Nico Eckhart, and the first three things that come up is like a scandal that he was involved in 2020 for like potentially defrauding people on solar panels, and then like some other stuff. And it's like, this is one of those things. It's like, especially lower league soccer in America is just like the wild, wild west. It's like some
Yeah.
PT type shit, like,
Yeah. No.
so, I mean, we'll have to
It,
see what happens, man, like,
it feels like these are two poisonous choices, right? Either we don't have new clubs, we don't sort of in communities, maybe not so much like Loudoun. And for anybody who doesn't know, Loudoun is the county. There's a town, Leesburg. I lived there for a bit. That's probably, if you were looking on a map, that's what you would find is sort of the center of what the market might be for this club. But the idea of putting clubs into smaller markets, that feels great. We can romanticize that as a potential, way to grow the game, and maybe one day have promotion relegation throughout the whole. We don't have to go down that road. But if the choice is we don't get those clubs, but if we do get those clubs, we get them with people who are maybe not not the kind of people we want involved. And then these stories happen, and then you sort of wonder what damage it does to the game. Now, there is a parallel to this on some level that has turned out, at least so far. I think there have been some other things that have happened with the club, but Sky Blue became Gotham, and there was this reckoning over the way that Sky Blue was run when those stories came out. I mean, on the Athletic, it was also, there. I think that those stories came out. If conditions are improving and there is going to be a new interest from Virginia Revolution, then yeah, perhaps there is a happy-ish ending to come down the line.
Yeah, I mean, despite my love of Schadenfreude or whatever, like I only would want that team to succeed, right? I mean, I'd only want it to be an interesting thing. I mean, the more thriving, successful soccer teams at any level we can have in this country, the better. So I hope that this sort of like added. I don't really want to even call it an added investment because no money changed hands, but I mean like this sort of like added organizational. Look, man, if there's one functional shower and these guys are training on the stadium pitch, I mean, literally 5 minutes away at Virginia Revolution, they have their own stadium. They have like multiple training fields that can be used. They have a locker room. They have sports performance. They have, I mean, I think people sometimes forget that some of these youth setups and affluent communities are like, they're completely insane, man. I mean,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
rival, if not better than many of these lower division teams. It's just
Yeah.
So I hope they can get it together. I mean, the other thing that was like the other piece of the piece that we didn't really talk about is the fact that new ownership essentially said that they were going to move on the coach, the general. They already have moved on the general manager, replacing with Steve Birnbaum, former DC United guy. But that too was a massive thing for the players. I mean, say we're whatever 5-1, 6-1 at the time. You're talking about firing our coach. This is ridiculous, So yeah, I'm also really curious to see what happens with that, with Ryan Martin, with others at the club.
Yeah, you root for the players, you root for Ryan Martin, for those people who have worked in those conditions. The other part of this, and I'm gonna say what a lot of our viewers and certainly a lot of people in American soccer would probably say, even though I'm very cynical about how it will ultimately be implemented, and I want to see the proof that this promotion and relegation plan has real teeth to it. There is at least some logic to the idea that if Loudoun United was threatened by relegation to a lower division, Pablo, that might spur something. I'm always I always question those incentives, but
No,
that's what some fans believe, that's how you.
not to interrupt, but I mean, I do have my own thoughts even on the USL Pro Rel thing, and let's use this case, as you said, as a sort of like a sample case. Right now it's like I don't think there's a huge difference, in at least in my perception, between USL Championship and League One. I mean, those two things seem largely interchangeable to me. I'd be really curious to see if their D1 league ever happens. B, if it does, what that standard is like. What the standard of play is like. Whether it will be perceived as being any different than the others. Because if it's not, if it's basically just like another version of the USL Championship, nobody's going to care. Like the owners won't care. They're all interchangeable. I think unfortunately, and I really do mean unfortunately, until MLS is sort of incorporated into whatever pyramid exists, I don't know how much any of this shit matters, and it certainly doesn't if USL's first division isn't like a really strong product. I would also say that USL has a history of like floating these kind of ideas to drum up public interest, and they, just like MLS, also exist largely on expansion fees and real estate deals, all this other stuff. Like, like they're as much of a whale shark as MLS is, right? Like if it stops swimming, it dies. It's like,
yeah.
So I just like, I'm a little skeptical, man. I'm sorry, I don't know.
No. I think that, look, if we're gonna just kind of be baldly honest about this, I think both of us, having covered the game in this country for as long as we have, it's the only real conclusion you can draw based on the history of the sport in this country. And lots of people have either short memories or are too young. And I didn't live through the NASL 1.0 era. I didn't live through the 60s when there were all these attempts to start leagues. And yet I know that history still, there are examples of these ideas. Oh, this is going to be great. We're going to do this. They're going to do that. And everything falls apart. And I want to believe that the USL has a real plan here. But as you said, until they follow through on this, it is all kind of just a bunch of smoke and mirrors. And we'll see. And hopefully, again, we figure out in this country, and I don't know what the answer is, because you don't want U.S. soccer to come in and put their foot down and be in charge of everything. Nobody really wants that, whether they were competent to do so or not, because that's the restrained trade stuff we keep getting in trouble with in this country, Pablo. But we will want clubs like Loudoun United or any team that starts up with the idea of, like, this is a professional soccer operation and we're going to build a fan base and do all the things that clubs are supposed to do. We want them to be on the up and up, and not to be forcing players to, first of all, play for the league minimum all the like that. Your basic investment is as low as it can possibly be. It doesn't indicate a true investment in the game. And I don't know how to vet for these owners, because again, if you say, well, these are the stringent standards we have, then maybe these teams don't exist in the first place.
I mean, I also think it's like, it shows you sort of where the mind is of many lower division fans, that, like, I just think, like, any lower division team that's attached to an MLS team is at a disadvantage immediately. I mean, like, especially, I don't know what they were thinking naming them, Portland Timbers 2, whatever, New York Red Bulls 2. I mean, it's just like, this isn't Europe, and like, that obviously is just gonna, in the United States, is gonna sell as like a subpar version of the first team, So look, man, I do hope it works out. I don't have a ton of faith in all this. I think even new ownership at Loudoun United, I mean, I think it's easy for them to come in and give these players a couple things that they've needed, but then, when they become the ones who are losing, millions of dollars a year, maybe those showers stop working again. Maybe, like, so it's like, I just, like, we need a long-term sample size in this case. And yeah, to your point, man, I mean, I don't know. I don't know how I've had this thought about the NWSL too, where it's like, they clearly are, like, really stringent about who joins ownership groups at teams, when it comes to social issues and social justice and stuff like that. And I've thought to myself, it's like really impressive in a way, especially because, like, they need the money, like, more than MLS does. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, MLS is out here, taking, like, blood money basically, or, have, like, I just think about, like, NYCFC's ownership group, or, like,
Sure.
there are many problematic owners throughout MLS. Let's be real, like,
Oh yeah, the original owner is a problematic owner.
yeah,
Let's not
exactly.
pretend otherwise.
If you go down to USL, it's like, they very much cannot be, like, they cannot afford to be, like, real choosy about who invests in the league.
And it looks like it seems to be, and again, let's not lionize USL because they've made some announcements about I mean, look, again, there are lots of people there I respect, and I do think there are people who care about the game in real important ways. But just like any other sports business in America, it is largely about making money, or it's largely about money coming into the specific pockets of the people who originated the USL, or who bought the USL, whatever, New Rock and all that stuff, and the Papadakis and all. And again, I'm not saying they're all evil, Bond villain types, but you have to remember what their motivations are when we talk about these stories.
It's like MLS. I mean, the day that MLS institutes pro rel is the day that they figure out it'll make them more money. I mean, that's not like that is not some insane conspiracy. That's just like, it's capitalism, baby. So, like,
there we are.
That is the long and short of it. So
yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Well, okay. So Loudoun United, incredible story. Hopefully, again, things improving. Go check that out on The Athletic and support Pablo's work. And we'll see you around. Thank you very much for the time, Pablo.
Thanks.